All right, my friends, in this video, we are going to be going over the second part of the ERQ that we were just working on in class together. Before we jump into that, let's refresh our brains on what the question is that we're answering. It's on the front at the top of the paper. It says in Act 1, Lysander says, "The course of true love never did run smooth." How has this statement been proven true in the story so far? For our answer that we came up with, we pointed out two different relationships that we've been introduced to so far in the story that prove that this statement is true. Our first E1 and our first E2 focused on the first relationship that we mentioned in our answer, which is the relationship between Theseus and Hippolyta. We are about to write our second E1 and our second E2, and so for that part of our answer, we're going to focus on this next relationship that we mentioned in our answer at the beginning, which is the relationship between Lysander and Hermia. Quick refresher, remember, Hermia's dad wants her to marry Demetrius. She does not want to marry Demetrius because she is in love with Lysander. So Lysander and Hermia in Act 1 came up with a plan that they're going to run away in the middle of the night. They're going to go to Lysander's aunt's house and they're going to get married in secret. So again, for our second E1 and E2, this is the relationship, Lysander and Hermia, that we're going to be focusing on. Whenever we are moving from our first E1 and E2 to our second E1 and E2, we always want to start with an internal transition. That's a word that we give to our audience. That's the person whoever is reading our response, to let them know, hey, we're moving on to something different. For our internal transition today, we're going to use the word furthermore. And after you write that word, make sure you add a comma. Now, normally we would jump in and we would put "the text says." I want to give a little more context here, just because there are so many different characters in this story. I want to make sure that the person who's reading this knows exactly who I'm talking about. So I'm going to put, when discussing her situation, Hermia, because again, remember, I want them to know who I'm talking about. Hermia says, and then I'm going to put my quotation marks. So like I said, normally we could just put "the text says," but again, since this story has so many different characters, I really just want to make sure that whoever is reading this knows exactly who I'm talking about. So when we are looking for our evidence for this E1, what we would need to do is go back to the text, and we're going to look for something that Hermia says that proves that it has not been an easy journey for her and Lysander in terms of their love story. So I've done the hard work for you here. I'm going to pull up Act 1 on my screen, and I've already highlighted a quote that I think would be good here. It says, "Hermia, I'd rather wither away than give myself to someone I don't love." Essentially what Hermia is saying here is, I would rather wither away to nothing. I would rather die than have to marry someone who I don't love. And of course, she's talking about Demetrius. She does not love Demetrius. She does not want to marry him. And it's so important to her that she would rather give up her life than give herself to someone who she is not truly in love with. So for our quote, that's the quote we're going to use. I'm going to copy it straight from the text. You can copy it from me. She said, "I'd rather wither away than give myself to someone I don't love." And of course, remember, anytime that we have opening quotation marks, we have closing quotation marks. Since this is textual evidence that I am citing directly from the text, I am making sure that I copied it word for word, exactly as it was in the passage. And I'm putting those quotation marks to let my audience know these are not my words. This is what the passage said. Anytime we have an E1, it should always be followed up with an E2. So this is where we are explaining our evidence. Remember that E2s should be at least 2 sentences. For my first sentence, I want to give my audience a little bit of a better understanding of what Hermia is talking about here. So I'm going to say, in this quote, Hermia is explaining how much it would hurt her to be with anyone except Lysander. Okay, so again, like we've already talked about, Hermia is in love with Lysander. And in this quote, she is basically saying, listen, I would rather give up my life than to be with anyone other than him. And I don't know about you guys, but that definitely doesn't make love sound very smooth. For our second sentence, let's give a little bit of context to our audience about the plan that Lysander and Hermia came up with. So we're going to say, in fact, she loves him so much. When we say him, we're talking about Lysander. She is willing to run away with him. So I want you to think about that for just a second. She is willing to give up everything she knows, her home, her friends, where she grew up, just to be with this man that she loves. So if we go back to the beginning and we think about what Lysander said, the course of true love never did run smooth. I think this is a really good piece of evidence to use because it shows that her life is not going to be smooth, but she's willing to do that because she loves Lysander. Let's add one more sentence here to really fully explain this. So we said, in fact, she loves him so much, she is willing to run away with him. This shows her love life definitely isn't smooth or easy. At the end, we always want to add a concluding sentence to wrap up our thoughts. My favorite way to start a concluding sentence is with the word clearly. For my concluding sentence here, I want to remind my audience about what the quote was that we were talking about. So I'm going to say, Lysander was right when he said, the course of true love never did run smooth. I'm adding quotation marks around that as well because it is a quote from the text and it is something that he said. So if we put it all together, here is what the second part of our response looks like here. Furthermore, when discussing her situation, Hermia says, I'd rather wither away than give myself to someone I don't love. In this quote, Hermia is explaining how much it would hurt her to be with anyone except Lysander. In fact, she loves him so much, she is willing to run away with him. This shows her love life definitely isn't smooth or easy. Clearly, Lysander was right when he said the course of true love never did run smooth. That is an excellent internal transition, E1, E2, and concluding sentence.